The inheritance. The scent of aged paper and dry dust was Marcus's preferred atmosphere. It clung to his tweed jacket, permeated his sparse apartment, and filled the narrow space between his desk and the towering shelves of historical texts. For years, he had meticulously cataloged the forgotten narratives of lesser-known European noble families, a solitary pursuit that satisfied his precise, analytical mind. He found solace in the verifiable, the documented, the irrefutable. Superstition, folklore, and anything beyond the realm of empirical evidence were dismissed with a quiet, almost clinical disdain. The solicitor's letter, however, had introduced an unwelcome disruption. Its heavy cream paper and formal script felt anachronistic, a relic from a time Marcus preferred to study rather than inhabit. It announced the unexpected passing of a distant, largely unknown relative, and, more remarkably, an inheritance. Blackwood Manor. The name itself carried a faint, unsettling echo, a whisper from the periphery of his research into regional legends. Tales he had always filed under local eccentricities. He had no memory of the deceased, no connection to the manor beyond the legal document now resting on his desk. The notion was absurd. He had no desire for property, especially not one situated in a remote, forgotten corner of the continent, far from his research libraries and his ordered existence. Yet, a peculiar, almost academic curiosity stirred within him. The solicitor's follow-up communication included a brief, almost apologetic mention of the manor's reputation. Marcus, ever the historian, saw this as an opportunity for first-hand observation of how local myths evolved, a chance to dissect the anatomy of superstition. He would visit, assess, and then undoubtedly divest himself of the property. The journey was long, a deliberate progression from the familiar concrete arteries of the city to increasingly narrow, unpaved tracks. The landscape shifted, growing wilder, more untamed. Dense forests pressed in on either side of the road, their ancient trees, gnarled and dark, forming a perpetual twilight canopy. He found himself increasingly isolated, the last vestiges of modern civilization receding with each kilometer. A single barrier arm, rusted and worn, bisected the narrow road. Inside, a uniformed guard, his face weathered and expressionless, examined Marcus's passport with a deliberate slowness that bordered on theatrical. The small office smelled of stale coffee and damp wool. "Purpose of visit?" the guard asked, his voice flat, his gaze unwavering. "Inheritance," Marcus replied, the word feeling oddly out of place in the desolate setting. Blackwood Manor. A subtle flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed the guard's eyes. A brief tightening around the mouth, a fractional pause before he stamped the passport. He pushed it back across the counter. "Blackwood," he repeated, the name a low murmur, devoid of inflection, yet somehow heavy with unspoken meaning. "You will find it." Quiet. The implication hung in the air, a faint, disquieting chord. Marcus felt a prickle of irritation. He disliked ambiguity, especially when it hinted at the very superstitions he intended to debunk. The final stretch of road was little more than a muddy track, overgrown with weeds and brambles. It terminated abruptly before a pair of immense wrought iron gates, their intricate scrollwork consumed by rust. They hung askew on broken hinges, revealing a long, winding drive swallowed by encroaching foliage. Beyond, through a screen of towering skeletal trees, the manor emerged. The scent of damp stone and something else, something subtly acrid, mingled with the earthy smell of the woods. He told himself it was merely the smell of decay, of an unmaintained building. Yet an irrational shiver traced its way down his spine. He was a man of reason, a scholar. This was a building, nothing more. He retrieved a heavy iron key from his coat pocket, another item provided by the solicitor. The main door, a colossal slab of oak studded with iron, groaned in protest as he pushed it open. The sound reverberated through the vast, echoing entrance hall, a deep, resonant sigh that seemed to emanate from the very stone. Inside, the air was stagnant, thick with the smell of mildew and dust, the accumulated breath of centuries. Light struggled to penetrate the grimy leaded windows, casting the hall in a perpetual twilight. Tapestries, faded and threadbare, depicting scenes of forgotten hunts and battles, adorned the walls, their colors muted to somber browns and greens. Marcus stood in the center of the hall, his gaze sweeping across the decaying opulence. He noted the intricate carvings on the banister, the cobweb-draped chandelier, the cracked marble tiles underfoot. His historian's eye immediately began to date the various architectural elements to trace the manor's evolution. This was merely an old house, neglected, perhaps, but ultimately a collection of stone, wood, and plaster. The legends were just that, legends. Yet, as he stood there, a subtle shift occurred. He felt a peculiar pressure, as if the very air was pressing in, trying to tell him something. He dismissed it as the natural effect of an unheated, massive structure. The narrow, winding road finally gave way to a gravel drive, overgrown and barely discernible. Marcus navigated his vehicle through a tunnel of ancient, gnarled trees. Their branches interlaced so tightly they blotted out the midday sun. He had passed the final rudimentary border checkpoint hours ago, a forgotten wooden shack manned by a listless clerk, and since then, the world had thinned, receded into an oppressive quiet. The manor, when it emerged from the gloom, was less a dwelling and more a geological feature. Stone, dark and weathered, rose in a series of asymmetrical gables and turrets, its windows like vacant eyes staring out over a neglected expanse of lawn. It was precisely as described in the estate documents: ancient, isolated, and undeniably imposing. Stepping out, Marcus surveyed the facade. Ivy, thick as a man's wrist, clung to the walls, obscuring much of the masonry, but he could discern the intricate, almost grotesque carvings around the main entrance. It was a repository of history, a physical archive awaiting his scrutiny. His irritation from the previous day, sparked by the estate agent's veiled warnings, had dissipated, replaced by a quiet, professional anticipation. He was here to unearth facts, not to entertain fictions. The interior was a study in profound neglect. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through grimy windows. He chose a room on the ground floor, a spacious library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, as his temporary base. It was large enough to accommodate his extensive collection of research materials. Dozens of archival boxes, meticulously labeled and cataloged. He spent the remainder of the afternoon ferrying these boxes from his vehicle, arranging them in neat stacks, his mind already formulating a system for their integration into the manor's own historical records. As dusk began to bleed through the high windows, painting the dust motes in shades of bruised orange, Marcus paused, a heavy folio of genealogical charts in his hands. He frowned, stepping towards it. No discernible draft. The window was latched tight. He attributed it to the sheer age of the structure, a peculiar thermal anomaly common in such venerable buildings, and dismissed it, returning to his task. Later, as he was cross-referencing a handwritten ledger against a printed historical text, a sound reached him. Faint, indistinct, like a rustling of old paper, or perhaps a sigh. He stiffened, pen hovering above the page. He rationalized it as the wind, a trick of the acoustics in the cavernous room, or perhaps a rodent scuttling within the walls. He made a mental note to investigate for pests, a practical concern. He continued his work, the methodical nature of it a comforting anchor. He had laid out a series of index cards on a large oak desk, each representing a distinct period in the manor's lineage. He stepped away for a moment to retrieve a specific volume from a box, and when he returned, a particular card, detailing the early 18th century owner, a reclusive botanist, had shifted. Not significantly, but enough that its alignment with the others was visibly disturbed. He stared at it, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Had he brushed it inadvertently? He was certain he hadn't. He picked it up, placed it back precisely, and watched it for a long moment. Nothing. He sighed, attributing it to his own absent-mindedness, a minor lapse in focus after a long day. The house, he thought, was certainly testing his organizational skills. He decided to explore the desk itself. It was a magnificent piece, solid oak with numerous small drawers. Most were empty, filled with only a fine layer of dust. But in the deepest, narrowest drawer on the right side, tucked beneath a false bottom he discovered only by accident, he found a bundle of letters. Yellowed, brittle, tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was spidery, almost illegible in places. He untied the ribbon with care, unfolding the top letter. The date was early 19th century. The author, a woman named Eleanor, wrote to a distant relative, her words initially mundane, detailing the weather and local gossip. But as Marcus continued to read, the tone shifted. "The days here are long," one passage read, "and the nights longer still. I find myself forgetting simple things, the names of flowers, the purpose of my own tasks. The house, it seems to listen." Another letter, dated several months later, was more fragmented, the script less steady. "The walls shift. I no longer trust my own eyes. The boundaries." This was not a draft or a creaking timber. This was a narrative of unraveling, a testament to a mind under duress. He reread the last phrase. "The boundaries. They blur." He considered the possibility of a psychological affliction, perhaps a hereditary madness, but the repeated, almost obsessive references to the house itself were peculiar. He set the letters down, a new subtle tension tightening in his chest. The ancient manor loomed, a silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Marcus had navigated the final stretch of gravel, his vehicle finally coming to rest before a vast, rotting oak door. The journey, stretching hours past the rudimentary border checkpoint, had been exhausting, yet a strange sense of quiet anticipation settled over him. He spent the first few days in a methodical unpacking, his historian's mind cataloging the manor's decaying grandeur, its dust-shrouded artifacts. He approached the house as he would any historical site, a collection of facts, dates, and architectural styles, dismissing the whispers of local legend as the predictable embellishments of rural isolation. Yet even in his meticulous process, an undercurrent of something else began to seep in. It started subtly, with the house's own noises. The groan of ancient timbers in the dead of night, the sigh of wind through ill-fitting window frames. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, attributed these to the predictable mechanics of an old, neglected structure. Then came the phantom sounds. A distant scraping, like furniture being dragged across an upper floor when he knew he was alone. A faint, almost imperceptible murmur that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, always just beyond the reach of clear hearing. He would pause, straining his ears, only to be met with the profound silence of the empty house. His initial reaction was to dismiss it as fatigue, the echoes of his own thoughts in the quiet. The visual disturbances followed. Sleep offered no respite. His nights became a fractured landscape of vivid, disquieting dreams. Voices, indistinct and numerous, would swirl around him, speaking in languages he couldn't comprehend, yet their tone conveyed an unsettling urgency, a profound sorrow. Each morning, a layer of exhaustion settled deeper into his bones, blurring the edges of his concentration. Determined to ground himself in logic, Marcus immersed himself in the manor's history. He established a temporary study in the library, its shelves laden with leather-bound volumes, some of them still sealed with brittle, ancient dust. He meticulously sifted through old estate records, faded letters, and obscure local gazettes, his fingers brushing against paper that crumbled with age. He sought to reconstruct the lives of the manor's past inhabitants, hoping to find a rational explanation for its unsettling atmosphere. What he uncovered was not a simple history, but a disquieting pattern, like a recurring motif in a macabre tapestry. The manor had a peculiar habit of consuming its occupants. not through violence, but through a slow, insidious erosion. He found records of a magistrate from the late 17th century, a man of renowned intellect, who after years of solitary residence, a wealthy merchant who had retired to the manor for peace and quiet, had been found dead in his study. A note clutched in his hand describing an unbearable pressure from within the walls. His mind apparently fractured. In the early 20th century, a young artist seeking inspiration in the manor's solitude had meticulously documented her descent into a waking nightmare. Her final entries detailing a constant, suffocating awareness of unseen eyes before she too disappeared, leaving behind only her unfinished grotesque canvases. The pattern was undeniable. Prolonged isolation within these walls invariably led to madness, disappearance, or self-inflicted death. Each account spoke of a creeping psychological torment, a sense of being watched, drained, consumed. He looked up from the crumbling page, his gaze sweeping across the vast, silent library. The murmurs seemed to intensify, no longer just a trick of the wind, but a chorus just beyond understanding, pressing against the very air in the room. He killed the engine. The silence that descended was absolute, save for the faint creak of the old vehicle settling on its springs. He retrieved the heavy iron key from his pocket, its cold weight a tangible link to the property's ancient claim. The lock, stiff with decades of disuse, groaned in protest, a metallic shriek echoing in the stillness. With a final, resonant click, the door yielded. A blast of frigid, stagnant air, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something indefinably sweet yet putrid washed over him. He stepped across the threshold. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a cavernous entrance hall. Dust motes danced in the light, a silent, swirling blizzard. The air was heavy, clinging to his clothes, his skin. It felt older than the stones themselves, a compressed history. Marcus, a man whose life revolved around the methodical excavation of the past, felt a strange resonance here, an almost physical pressure. He was a historian, not a romantic. This was decay, not enchantment. He cataloged, he observed, he rationalized. The drafts were structural flaws. The faint, high-pitched whine was the wind through a broken pane. The subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in the floorboards were the house settling, as any old structure would. He was tired, his senses heightened by the isolation and the sheer scale of the task ahead. As he swept his light across a tarnished silver frame on the mantelpiece, a fleeting image superimposed itself over the reflection of the dust-choked room. For a split second, he saw a woman, her face pale, her eyes wide with an emotion he couldn't quite place, her lips moving as if in silent distress. Then it was gone, replaced by his own weary reflection. Marcus blinked, shaking his head. Fatigue, he concluded. An optical illusion caused by the dust and the poor light. His mind, accustomed to sifting through verifiable facts, dismissed it with practiced ease. He moved on, his methodical approach undeterred. But as he ascended the grand staircase, the feeling of being observed intensified. It was not a physical sensation, no prickling on his neck, but a cognitive certainty, as if a presence had settled into the very fabric of the air around him. He paused, listening. Only the faint creak of the house, a sigh of ancient wood, answered him. He told himself it was the loneliness, the natural response to such profound isolation. He was accustomed to solitude, but this felt different. This felt like a judgment. Upstairs, the feeling solidified. In a long, dark corridor lined with closed doors, he began to hear things. They ebbed and flowed, sometimes fading to nothing, then swelling again, a phantom tide of hushed voices. He stopped, holding his breath, straining to decipher a single word. Nothing. Just the indistinct murmur, a sound without source, a chorus of phantoms, He ran a hand through his hair, a nascent unease stirring beneath his carefully constructed skepticism. The house was playing tricks on him. Old houses often did. He pushed open a door into what must have been a bedchamber. The large four-poster bed was stripped bare, its mattress sunken and stained. Please, not again. The words weren't in his ears, but in his mind, a direct transmission. And then, the room around him shifted. The dust vanished. The stains on the mattress faded. The wallpaper, moments before peeling and discolored, now held vibrant patterns of deep crimson and gold. A woman, the same woman from the silver frame, now stood by the window, her back to him, her shoulders shaking. The scene was vivid, terrifyingly real, yet Marcus knew he was still standing in the decrepit room, his flashlight beam cutting through the impossible illusion. He was an observer, an unwelcome witness. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vision dissolved. The room reverted to its state of decay. Marcus stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat. His mind, so adept at rationalization, found no purchase. This was no trick of the light, no fatigue-induced hallucination. He had seen it. He had heard it. The house was not just old, it was alive, and it was replaying its memories. Not for him, but through him. It was not just an observation. It was an absorption, a slow, deliberate drawing in. He felt the house's ancient, malevolent consciousness pressing in, an unseen weight, judging his presence, assessing his mind. The house, he realized with a sickening lurch, wanted more than just an inhabitant. It wanted to consume him. The vibrant crimson and gold of the wallpaper dissolved, bleeding back into the peeling, water-stained patterns Marcus had grown accustomed to. The plush mattress, briefly plump and pristine, sagged once more beneath him, its springs groaning a familiar lament. The woman, her face a striking blend of fear and accusation, vanished like smoke. Marcus sat bolt upright, his breath catching in a dry rasp. The silence of the room, once merely oppressive, now hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the grit of dust, the stubble of several days' growth. Had he fallen asleep? Was it a dream, born of exhaustion and the manor's unsettling atmosphere? He wanted to believe it, clung to the rational explanation with a desperate grip. But the memory of the direct transmission, the words in his mind, not merely heard, lingered with a chilling clarity that defied dismissal. A deep tremor ran through the floorboards, a guttural sigh from the house itself. Marcus pushed himself off the bed, his muscles stiff, his movements sluggish. He needed air. He needed distance. He needed to prove to himself that the manor was just a building, not a living, breathing entity capable of such insidious illusions. The engine coughed, then caught, sputtering to life with a defiant roar. He reversed, gravel crunching under the tires, and drove down the long, winding lane that led away from the manor. The road was narrow, flanked by ancient, gnarled trees that clawed at the sky, their branches interwoven to form a perpetual twilight tunnel. Marcus pressed the accelerator, a desperate need for open road, for familiar landmarks, overriding his usual cautious nature. The air, heavy and humid, seemed to thicken with every mile. He checked his watch, then the fuel gauge. He should have reached the main road by now, should have seen some sign of civilization. Finally, the trees thinned, giving way to a clearing. Ahead, a concrete barrier spanned the road, a simple wooden hut beside it. This was it, the border checkpoint. He remembered seeing it on old maps, a relic from a forgotten dispute, long since abandoned. But as he approached, a figure emerged from the hut. It was a guard, dressed in a faded olive green uniform, a cap pulled low over his eyes. He stood perfectly still, an old, rusted rifle held loosely in his hands. The checkpoint was supposed to be deserted, unmanned for decades. He stopped a few feet from the barrier, the engine idling roughly. The guard did not move, did not speak. Marcus tried to roll down his window, but the mechanism jammed, refusing to budge. He leaned across the passenger seat, forcing the window down with a grunt of effort. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice sounding thin and reedy in the heavy air. "Is this road open?" The guard remained motionless, a silent sentinel. No flicker of an eyelid, no shift in stance. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. He tried again, louder this time. "Hello? Can I pass?" Still no response. The air grew heavy with an unspoken threat. Marcus swallowed, his mouth dry. He could try to drive around the barrier, but the guard, though still, radiated an immense, unyielding authority. It was a silent command. Turn back. A profound weariness settled over him. His determination, so sharp moments before, began to fray at the edges. A strange, insidious thought wormed its way into his mind. Why fight it? The house was waiting. It was familiar. It was home. With a sigh that felt too heavy for his chest, Marcus shifted the Land Rover into reverse. The guard remained frozen, watching him with an unseen gaze as he slowly, reluctantly, turned the vehicle around. He drove back the way he came, the trees closing in behind him, the air growing heavier still. Back in the manor, the silence was no longer empty, but filled with a peculiar resonance. The air within the ancient walls, though musty and thick, felt less hostile, almost welcoming. He walked through the echoing halls, no longer searching for an exit, but simply existing within its vastness. Days blurred into an indistinguishable haze. Marcus ate when he remembered, slept when exhaustion overwhelmed him, but mostly he wandered. He stopped shaving, his beard growing wild and unkempt. His clothes, once clean and pressed, were now wrinkled and stained, smelling faintly of dust and damp stone. The house, he realized, was not merely holding him. It was consuming him, slowly, subtly, like a parasitic vine drawing nutrients from its host. Yet, within this slow erosion, there was an undeniable, almost comforting pull. The manor possessed him, not with chains or locks, but with a silent, pervasive embrace. He was no longer trying to leave. He was merely here, and the house seemed to purr with a satisfaction only he could feel. The immense, unyielding authority of the guard at the border checkpoint pressed down on Marcus. He had driven for what felt like hours, the engine a low thrum against the suffocating silence of the forest road, only to be met by this impassive, towering figure. The air, thick and still, carried no sound save for the faint rustle of leaves high above. His mouth was dry, a sandy film coating his tongue. He could try to drive around the barrier, but the guard's very stillness radiated a command. Turn back. A profound weariness settled over him, heavier than any physical exhaustion. It wasn't just the fatigue of the journey, it was a deeper, bone-deep resignation. His determination, once a sharp, insistent spark, now flickered, threatened by an encroaching, suffocating apathy. He put the car in reverse, the gravel crunching under the tires. The guard remained motionless, a sentinel carved from shadow. Marcus didn't look in the rearview mirror as he turned the vehicle around. The road back felt longer, the trees pressing in closer, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the glass. He didn't question the sudden, inexplicable pull that now drew his back towards the manor. It was a subtle, insidious whisper in the periphery of his thoughts, promising a strange kind of solace, a warped familiarity that now seemed preferable to the stark, unyielding unknown of the outside world. He felt less like he was driving, and more like he was being drawn, an iron filing to a vast magnetic presence. When he finally navigated the winding, overgrown driveway, the manor loomed, a vast, silent maw. He parked the car, the engine dying with a final shudder. He pushed the door open further, stepping into the echoing foyer. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and ancient, like old blood and damp earth. Had the tapestry on the far wall always been so faded? He was certain it had depicted a vibrant hunting scene, rich with greens and browns, the figures poised in mid-action. Now it was a washed-out tableau of indistinct shapes, their faces blurred, their movements lost in the threadbare fabric, as if time had not merely worn it, but leached the very life from its threads. A flicker of unease, then a deeper, more profound doubt. He had spent weeks poring over the manor's records, meticulously cataloging its art. This was not the tapestry he remembered. His memory, usually so precise, felt suddenly porous. He ascended the grand staircase, his hand trailing along the banister. On the landing, he paused, disoriented. He was sure there had been a tall, arched window at the end, overlooking the overgrown gardens, a source of natural light. Now, only another door, indistinguishable from the rest, stood sentinel. The sudden absence of the window felt like a physical blow, a piece of his mental map violently ripped away. This was impossible. He knew this house. He tried to retrace his steps, to find a landmark, a specific squeal of a hinge, but the layout seemed to subtly shift around him, like water flowing through his grasp, reforming itself just beyond his perception. The detailed mental map he had sketched, once so precise, dissolved into an incoherent tangle of unfamiliar walls and identical doorways. He found himself in a room he didn't recognize. The air here was particularly stagnant, heavy with the scent of forgotten lives. On a small, unvarnished table lay a worn, leather-bound journal. He picked it up, his fingers tracing the faint, faded script on the cover. Elias Thorne, 1789. A name he knew from his research, a former resident, one of the many who had succumbed to the manor's enigmatic influence, vanishing without a trace. He opened the journal. The handwriting, elegant yet spidery, filled the pages. The words described a growing despair, a feeling of being trapped, of the house changing around the author. The walls breathe, a line read. The corridors lengthen, and my own face in the looking glass grows strange to me. My thoughts, once my own, now echo with forgotten voices. Marcus felt a profound shiver. He looked down at his own hand holding the journal. Was it his hand? The skin seemed paler, the knuckles more pronounced, the nails slightly discolored, as if from age. A sudden dizzying sensation, a disorienting lurch in his perception. He closed his eyes, then opened them again, staring at the journal. My journal. The thought was clear, concise, utterly foreign, yet undeniably present in his mind. Marcus wrote this. He slammed the journal shut. No, this was Elias Thorne's. He was Marcus. He repeated his name silently, a desperate mantra against the encroaching fog. Marcus, historian, skeptical, rational. But the name felt thin, brittle, like a piece of old paper about to tear, its edges fraying under an invisible strain. He clutched the journal, the leather cool and smooth against his palm, a tangible anchor in a rapidly dissolving reality. He tried to leave the room, to find the door he had entered through, but it was gone. Panic, sharp and metallic, began to bloom in his chest, expanding like a noxious gas. He spun around, searching for another exit. There was none. The room was a box, the single chair, the hearth, the journal, all that remained. He was sealed in. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to sit in the high-backed chair, to sink into its faded velvet and simply be. He resisted it, fighting the insidious pull, a current dragging him towards a placid. The cold wind, sharp with the scent of diesel and damp earth, bit at Marcus's exposed skin. He shivered, not from the chill alone, but from a deeper internal tremor. He stood before a concrete barrier, a stark, functional structure that marked the edge of something. Beyond it lay a different country, a different reality, or so he desperately hoped. This was the border checkpoint. The sign, stark black lettering on a faded white background, confirmed it, though the words seemed to swim slightly, the edges of the letters blurring. He presented a worn passport to the uniformed guard. The guard, a man with a heavy jaw and eyes that seemed perpetually narrowed, took it without a word, his movements precise, almost robotic. Marcus felt a surge of irrational fear. Was this real? Was he real? The question, a persistent whisper from the manor, had followed him, clinging to the fabric of his thoughts. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, trying to recenter, to grasp the solid ground of his own identity. Marcus, historian, rational. Purpose of travel? The guard asked, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. He did not look up from the passport, his gaze fixed on the laminated page. Marcus hesitated. To leave, he managed, the words tasting like ash. But that wasn't an answer the guard would accept. He tried again. Research. I need to distance myself from a project. The guard finally lifted his head. His eyes, a pale, unsettling gray, met Marcus's. There was no recognition, no empathy, only a professional blankness that felt more unnerving than outright hostility. Your residence is listed as Blackwood Manor. The name struck Marcus like a physical blow. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on him. The wind had died down, or perhaps Marcus's hearing had simply narrowed, focusing only on the guard's voice, on the manor's name. He had driven for hours, he thought. The journey was a blur, a series of wrong turns and familiar landscapes twisting into alien forms. He remembered the desperate need to escape, to put miles between himself and the encroaching shadow of the house. Yet the further he drove, the more the manor seemed to seep into his perception, its presence growing rather than diminishing. Anywhere, Marcus said, the word raw with desperation. Away from that place. He gestured vaguely behind him, toward the direction he had come, toward the invisible pull he still felt. He stared at the guard, searching for a flicker of something human, something that would break the facade, but found nothing. The man's eyes were like polished stones, reflecting only Marcus's own growing horror. He felt a sudden, sickening shift in his perception. The concrete barrier seemed to ripple, the stark lettering on the sign wavered. He saw not a man, but an extension, a facet of the manor itself, its tendrils reaching out, even here, at the supposed edge of its influence. It feeds. The thought did not form logically, but erupted in his mind, fully formed, undeniable. Not merely a haunting, not just a place of tragic history. It was alive, a predator. And its sustenance was not blood or flesh, but something far more insidious. Memories, sanity, the very essence of a life. He remembered the journal, the blurring lines between his hand and Elias Thorne's, his thoughts and the thoughts of the man who had lived and died within those walls centuries ago. He remembered the way his own past felt distant, fragmented, replaced by echoes of other lives. The manor was not merely preserving history, it was consuming it, absorbing the identities of its inhabitants, growing stronger, more complex, more potent with each ingestion. The guard's pen clicked again, the sound now like the gnashing of tiny, unseen teeth. Your passport is incomplete, the guard said, pushing the document back across the counter. His voice was still even, but Marcus heard a subtle, almost imperceptible undertone now, a low, guttural thrum that vibrated through his bones. You haven't listed a destination. Marcus looked down at the passport. The photo was his, undeniably. But the name, Marcus, seemed faint, already fading. And the rest of the page was blank, the spaces for destination and duration of stay empty, as if he had no future, No place to go beyond the manor's grasp. He wasn't leaving. He couldn't. The border checkpoint, this desperate attempt at escape, was merely another stage in the process, another morsel offered for the manor's consumption. His memories of the drive, the hope of freedom, the very act of seeking an exit, all were being meticulously digested. He was its current meal. The preferred one, perhaps, given his historian's mind, rich with knowledge and a deep connection to the past. He was not just living in the house. He was becoming a part of it, his life force slowly siphoned, his identity dissolved into its hungry, ancient fabric. The determination he had clung to, the desire to understand, now twisted into a horrifying comprehension. He looked back towards the road, towards the unseen pull of Blackwood Manor, and felt its ancient, malevolent hunger reaching for him, drawing him home. The sterile, fluorescent hum of the border checkpoint pulsed around Marcus. A thin, official-looking counter stretched before him, its surface scuffed and impersonal. Behind it, a figure in a dark uniform observed him with an unnerving stillness, their face obscured by shadow. Marcus clutched the passport. The photo, his own, stared back with an unfamiliar intensity, an echo of a man he once was. But the name, Marcus, truly was fading, the ink blurring into the fibrous paper, as if his very identity were dissolving. The blank spaces for destination and duration of stay mocked him, stark white voids that mirrored the emptiness of his future, a future that seemed to extend no further than the manor's encroaching walls. The hum wavered, then cracked. The edges of the counter softened, bled into the rough-hewn stone of the manor's great hall. He was still here, always here. The passport, a flimsy scrap of paper now, felt heavy in his hand. The illusion had been potent, a cruel trick of the house, yet it had served a purpose. It had shown him the depth of his predicament, the extent of the entity's consumption. It had shown him the absolute finality of his entrapment. And in that finality, a spark ignited. He was not merely a victim to be consumed. He was Marcus, a man who had once prided himself on logic, on deciphering the forgotten narratives of the past. The manor fed on memories, on sanity, on life itself. But it had not yet taken everything. A sliver of defiance, hard and unyielding as flint, settled in his chest. He would not simply fade. He would resist. He moved with a renewed, frantic energy, a desperate purpose overriding the usual lethargy the house imposed. He ignored it, his focus narrowed. He was no longer searching for history, but for an Achilles heel. He traversed the sprawling structure, his gaze sweeping over the familiar yet subtly shifting details of its interior. The tapestries seemed to ripple with unseen currents. The aged portraits watched him with eyes that followed his every move. He passed through the grand drawing room, its opulent furnishings draped in dust sheets that resembled shrouds, and into the network of service passages he had previously explored only in passing. These narrow, unlit corridors, often overlooked, felt like the manor's arteries, its secret veins. His fingers, raw and smudged with grime, traced the uneven surfaces of the stone walls. He sought an anomaly, a seam, a hidden recess. The house hummed around him, a low, infrasonic thrum that vibrated in his teeth, a subtle attempt to disorient, to dissuade. He ran his hand over it. The surface was cool, but a distinct vibration pulsed beneath his palm, faint but unmistakable. Not the house's general thrum, but something localized, contained. He applied pressure, pushing against the stone. Nothing. He tried again, feeling along the edges, searching for a trigger. His frustration mounted, a hot flush rising in his neck. The house seemed to press closer, the air growing heavy, making each breath a conscious effort. He gritted his teeth, refusing to yield. He noticed a tiny, almost invisible indentation near the bottom, shaped like a stylized, elongated knot. He pressed his thumb into it, twisting gently. With a low, grinding sigh, a section of the wall, about 2 feet square, pivoted inward. He peered inside, his vision struggling to penetrate the gloom. He withdrew his hand, examining the dust and fragments clinging to his fingertips. Bone. Tiny splinters of it. He pushed his arm deeper, feeling for the source of the vibration. His fingers closed around an object. He pulled it out, his arms scraping against the rough stone of the cavity. It was a sphere, perfectly smooth, about the size of a grapefruit, crafted from a material that absorbed the dim light. It was utterly black, yet its surface shimmered with an internal, shifting iridescence like oil on water. Etched into its surface were intricate, spiraling patterns, symbols he did not recognize, yet they resonated with an ancient, disturbing familiarity. The air around him felt lighter, less suffocating. This object, clearly not of any conventional material, resonated with a profound, almost primal energy. He turned it over in his hands. The spiraling patterns culminated in a single larger symbol on one side, a jagged, incomplete circle, like a bite taken from the moon. It was not a weapon, not a key, but an anchor, a focal point. This was not merely an artifact. It was a countermeasure, a way to resist. But the understanding that followed was terrifying. It required a ritual, a specific act, and it demanded a sacrifice. It was a gamble, a desperate, terrifying chance to fight back against the entity that had consumed his past and threatened his very existence. Marcus clutched the tattered journal in his hand, its pages damp with an unidentifiable moisture. Purpose of visit? The voice was flat, devoid of inflection, a dry rasp that seemed to vibrate in the air rather than emanate from the shadowed face. Marcus felt a tremor of unease, an absence. This was the house's latest trick, a bureaucratic nightmare designed to strip him of his identity, to make him question his very existence. He felt his memories flicker, fragments of his past life. The university, his colleagues, his former apartment suddenly distant, unreal. They? Was he truly Marcus? Or was he merely another imprint, another echo the house was preparing to swallow? I am Marcus, he insisted, pushing the name through a sudden tightness in his throat. I am here to understand. The figure remained silent for a long moment, an eternity in the humming, sterile space. Do not return. He turned, his heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The exit was a featureless wall, an expanse of concrete. He looked back at the figure, but it was already receding, dissolving into the pulsing luminescence. The hum intensified, becoming a high-pitched whine that grated against his teeth. Then, with a sudden, sickening lurch, the illusion shattered. The humming faded, replaced by the familiar creak of ancient timbers. The border checkpoint dissolved, not into thin air, but into the dusty, decaying hallway of the manor. Marcus stood in the second-floor corridor, the journal still clutched in his hand, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The wall before him was no longer concrete, but a stretch of faded wallpaper, peeling in damp strips. The scent of stale air and metal was gone, replaced by the pervasive smell of rot and damp earth that clung to the house like a shroud. He stumbled forward, determination rekindling in his chest. The house wanted him gone, wanted him erased, but he had seen through its illusion. He would find the truth. But the house fought back. As his foot touched the first step, a violent shudder ran through the entire structure. A loud, splintering crack echoed from above, followed by a shower of plaster dust and aged wood slivers. The staircase groaned under an unseen pressure, and the banister, thick with generations of grime, suddenly twisted inwards, its oak turning black and gnarled as if by rapid decay. Marcus recoiled, barely avoiding a falling chunk of masonry that detached from the ceiling and smashed onto the landing where he had just stood. The impact sent vibrations up his legs, a physical blow. He chose another route, a narrower servant's stair he had discovered behind a tapestry. He pushed the heavy fabric aside, the woven threads coarse and damp against his fingers, and stepped into the dim, winding passage. He descended 3 steps, and then the passage rebelled. A low, guttural rumble emanated from the very walls. The stone blocks that formed the narrow corridor began to shift, grinding against each other with a sound like teeth on bone. Dust billowed, choking him. The passage narrowed, the walls pushing inwards, threatening to crush him. He pressed himself against one side, feeling the rough, cold stone scrape his jacket. The ceiling lowered, a slab of ancient wood threatening to pin him. He scrambled backwards, fighting the sudden claustrophobic panic that threatened to overwhelm him, until he burst back into the main corridor, gasping for breath. The tapestry swung shut behind him, as if drawn by an invisible hand. He leaned against the wall, heart hammering, sweat beading on his forehead. The house was alive. It was not merely haunted. It was a malicious, sentient organism, and it was actively trying to prevent him from reaching its core. He tried a different door, one that led to a rarely used antechamber. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell. "You want me gone?" he muttered, defiance hardening his gaze. "But I'm not leaving." He moved towards the study, where he had first begun his research, where the house's influence had first begun to blur his reality. He needed to find something, anything, that could give him leverage. They were the house's previous inhabitants, he knew, trapped, absorbed. And they were trying to stop him. A gaunt, translucent figure materialized directly in his path, its form shimmering like heat haze. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered gown from a bygone era, her hair a wild tangle. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged, only a silent scream that tore at Marcus's mind, a pure, unadulterated anguish that threatened to consume him. He felt the weight of her despair, the crushing emptiness of her forgotten existence. It was a vision, a memory, a nightmare made terrifyingly real, designed to break his will, to show him his own inevitable fate. But Marcus, though shaken, held firm. He had seen too much, endured too much to turn back now. The figure dissipated, its silent scream fading into the general hum of the house. He reached the study door. This time, it was unlocked. And there, on the desk, amidst his scattered notes and the tattered journal, was a new item. A small, intricately carved wooden box, previously unseen, rested in the center of the desk. Its surface was worn smooth, almost polished, and a faint, almost imperceptible pulsation emanated from within it. This box, he instinctively knew, was a receptacle, a vessel for the essence of those it had devoured, and it was waiting for his. The cacophony of overlapping whispers intensified, a swirling vortex of indistinct voices that clawed at Marcus's ears, scraping against his sanity. He stood before the study door, the heavy oak now appearing warped, its surface rippling as if seen through heat haze. The wood grain seemed to writhe, ancient faces momentarily forming in the knots, then dissolving back into the dark, polished expanse. A faint, cloying scent of decaying paper and damp earth permeated the air, thick and suffocating. He pushed the door. It did not swing open. It groaned, a sound less like wood on a hinge and more like a protracted, unwilling exhalation. The groan resonated deep within his chest, a low vibration that made his teeth ache. The study within was not the room he knew. Its dimensions were stretched, distorted. The ceiling receded into an impenetrable gloom, the walls impossibly tall, lined with shelves that rose beyond his sight. Books were no longer distinct entities. Their spines bled into the wood, their pages fused with the plaster, forming a grotesque, organic tapestry of decaying knowledge. In the center of the vast, elongated space, bathed in an unnaturally stark, gray light that seemed to emanate from nowhere, stood a structure. It resembled a barrier, a partition, with a single narrow opening. Behind this opening, a booth, simple and angular, rose like a sentinel. This was it. This was the border checkpoint. This was not a physical manifestation in the conventional sense. This was the house's core made manifest, a psychological architecture designed to process, to filter, to consume. He took a step forward. The floorboards beneath his feet felt soft, yielding, like walking on compacted ash. He saw figures, or rather, the impression of figures, standing silently at intervals along the barrier. They had no discernible features, yet Marcus felt their collective gaze upon him, a pressure that sought to dissect his very being. They were the house's guardians, its gatekeepers, constructed from the residue of those it had already claimed. It leaned forward, its form coalescing into something vaguely humanoid, its head tilting as if in question. Purpose. Passage. Marcus clenched his jaw. He had anticipated this. The house would not simply allow him to undo its work. It would fight with the only weapons it possessed, his own mind, his own history. He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers closing around the small, heavy object he had prepared. It was a fragment of granite, taken from the original hearthstone of the manor, a piece he had painstakingly chiseled free, believing it to be the true heart of the house's malevolence. He had inscribed it with symbols he had found in the oldest, most forbidden texts within the manor's buried library. Symbols of erasure, of nullification. He stepped closer to the border checkpoint, his boots sinking slightly with each stride. The air grew dense, pressing in on him, making each breath a conscious effort. These were not memories he wanted to lose, yet the house was attempting to draw them out, to absorb them, to weaken his resolve. Your papers, the silent thought echoed, clearer this time, emanating from the figure in the booth. Your right to be here. Marcus ignored the psychic assault. He focused on the granite fragment in his hand, its rough surface grounding him. This was the final threshold. He had discovered that the house fed not merely on life force, but on the remembrance of its inhabitants, twisting their identities into its own, an endless, self-perpetuating cycle of consumption. The inscribed granite, he hoped, was the key, imbued with the intent of anti-creation. He raised the granite fragment. The one in the booth stiffened, its amorphous head snapping up, a silent shriek of pure, unadulterated rage vibrating through the air, vibrating through Marcus's own bones. They swirled around him, a tangible gale of agony that threatened to rip him apart. But Marcus held firm. He pushed through the mental onslaught, his gaze fixed on the booth. He knew what he had to do. He had to cross this checkpoint, not with his identity intact, but by offering the house something it could not digest, something that would poison its very core. He lunged forward, thrusting the granite fragment towards the booth, towards the center of this impossible malevolent manifestation, initiating the final desperate confrontation. The granite fragment felt cold, rough, and undeniably real in Marcus's palm. Its weight was a tether, a defiant anchor against the torrent of dissolving memories and borrowed identities that swirled around him. The house roared, not with sound, but with a silent, consuming pressure that sought to flatten his individuality, to spread him thin across its ancient timbers and crumbling stones. He understood its hunger now, a parasitic craving for the unique resonance of each soul, not merely life force, but the very essence of remembrance, twisting it into its own vast composite identity. He would not be another forgotten whisper in its walls. The air shimmered, coalescing into a new, impossible space. The manor's familiar study warped, its bookshelves bending like reeds, its ceiling stretching into an infinite gray sky. Before him, stark and incongruous, materialized a structure of corrugated metal and splintered wood, a makeshift barrier. A sign, crudely painted, read, "Border Checkpoint." A chill, not of temperature but of profound wrongness, settled over Marcus. This wasn't real. not in the way he understood reality, yet it possessed an undeniable presence. The house was manifesting his deepest anxieties, his scholarly need for order and verification, twisting it into a final, inescapable gauntlet. The guard's eyes, sunken and vacant, fixed on Marcus. There was no malice, only an infinite, weary demand. "Papers!" A voice rasped, dry as ancient dust. It wasn't spoken aloud, but resonated directly within Marcus's skull, a command that bypassed his ears entirely. Marcus's mind raced, a frantic scramble against the encroaching fog. Papers? His passport, his birth certificate, his academic credentials? They were meaningless here. The house demanded something else, something far more fundamental. It wanted his identity, his memories, the very unique tapestry of his life experience. He gripped the granite fragment tighter. Its sharp edges dug into his skin, a small, welcome pain. This stone was from the manor's oldest foundation, a piece of its original, unremembering core. It was the antithesis of the house's ravenous memory. Marcus have myself. The guard remained impassive, its vacant gaze unwavering. The pressure intensified, a physical sensation of being stretched, pulled apart at the seams of his consciousness. Memories flashed before him. His childhood home, the scent of old books in a university library, the taste of cheap coffee during late-night research. He raised the granite fragment. This wasn't a weapon of physical destruction, but a tool of disruption. If the house fed on remembrance, perhaps it could be choked by the unremembered, the utterly primal and unyielding. He thrust the fragment forward, not at the guard, but at the shimmering barrier of the border checkpoint itself, at the very concept of its demanding presence. As the granite touched the ethereal structure, a silent shriek tore through the air, a soundless concussion that vibrated in his bones. The makeshift booth shuddered, the corrugated metal twisting and dissolving like smoke. The guard's form wavered, its vacant eyes widening fractionally before it too dissipated into nothingness. The border checkpoint collapsed, not with a crash, but with a silent implosion, sucking the distorted gray sky and the phantom queue into a vortex of non-existence. The pressure on Marcus's mind lessened, but it did not disappear entirely. He felt a profound, aching emptiness where some of his most cherished memories had been, not erased, but displaced. Absorbed into the retreating chaos. He had inflicted a wound, a momentary rupture in the house's consuming process. The study reasserted itself, though subtly altered. The air was thinner, the light somehow dimmer, as if a veil had been drawn over the world. Marcus stood, breathing heavily, his hands trembling. He had not been fully absorbed. He had resisted, fought back, and for a moment, he had broken the house's hold. He looked down at his hands, then at his reflection in a dusty mirror. His eyes seemed deeper, older, and in their depths, he saw not only his own weariness, but a faint, unsettling flicker that felt alien, a borrowed light. He had escaped the final absorption, but the house had taken its toll. He was no longer entirely Marcus. He was something new, something altered, a vessel carrying not just his own fractured identity, but echoes of the house's countless consumed lives. He had crossed the border, but into what?